Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar, and once again, this is my opinion. Like many who grew up in the 90s, I'm well aware of who Jackie Chan is. While for the longest time I never watched any of his movies, I still saw enough of the stuff he did in the peripheral to have that knowledge. Of course, I also watched the cartoon that was made about him that was on Kids WB, where the end would have a Jackie Chan Says thing. Which that was a fun cartoon. Definitely one I need to revisit and review on here in the future. Now, movie-wise, it was mainly for the longest time Rush Hour, Shanghai Noon, and also Shanghai Nights. And more recently, The Foreigner, which I thought was alright. That was definitely a fun movie to see with my friends in the theater, just from us sitting in the back joking with one another softly. Because the theater wasn't full, so it's not like we were causing a disturbance. But one film of his that I've been meaning to watch, because it was one that I've been recommended by friends, and just from its impact on his career, is Rumble in the Bronx. As you can tell from up there, that's what I'm reviewing today. This is going to be my Patreon request from John. Once again, thank you, John. Good. Watched it via Tubi, so if any of you want to watch this film without renting it, it is on there, but it's also available for rent on Amazon, just to throw that out there. With Tubi, you're going to have to sit through the annoyance of ads, but hey, it's a quick little thing like, oh, pee break real quick, go grab my food, come back. Oh, there we go. Now, this was the film that brought Jackie into the U.S. mainstream. He had made some films before this, the Drunken Master films, Operation Condor, Super Cop, I believe he was in that one. I think First Strike he did after this. I don't have his filmography in order up in front of me. But with how much of a hit the New Line edit of this film was, a lot of his older films started getting released. But because of the order, that's how we get that weird thing. Like with the Operation Condor films, they got released over here in the reverse order, and they completely changed the title. That's a funny little situation to look at. It's one of those things where you look at and go, oh my god, how did they mess this up? But it's what kicked off his superstardom, and look at all the films he made in the decades after that for America. He became very, very popular, as a character that he later played would say. The film was made for $7 million and it made $76 million, so pretty good gross no matter what you say. Even by Hollywood accounting, you can't say that that wasn't a success. It was directed by Stanley Tong, who did do some stunt work with the film and some other films, and his other films include First Strike, Super Cop 1 and 2, and Mr. Magoo. This is a situation where it's like, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. But then again, who knows? He could have been a fan of the show and been given the opportunity to do a big American film. He's like, I cannot turn that down, so I don't blame him. Jackie Chan plays Keong, who is a cop from Hong Kong who's coming to America to visit his uncle. Now, if you're only familiar with the American cut, that little part about him being a cop is one of the edits that is made. But I'm still bringing it up because it is technically there. He's visiting his uncle because his uncle is getting married. He attends the wedding, which he's shocked when he first meets his future aunt because it's not who he thinks it's going to be. His uncle is marrying a heavyset African-American lady, which that is played a little bit for laughs. But if you know anything about Asian cultures, you can kind of see why. Because it kind of strikes me as the thing that'd be surprised, but Uncle's line kind of does play it down a bit. It's like, welcome to America. In addition to getting married, Uncle Bill is selling the store he owns. He operates it in the Bronx, which is our first introduction in the dialogue to the fact that this is set in the Bronx, if the title didn't give it away. He doesn't say why, but we come to find out he's in a tough neighborhood and he's constantly getting shoplifted. People are holding him down for protection money. And he's trying to make that seem not the case. He's trying to downplay it. And he does sell it to a lady named Elaine. At first, she's a little hesitant about the price, but she's eventually talked into it, and he invites her to the wedding. Keong and Elaine, they hit it off as friends, and he agrees to stop and help her, which leads to our first little action bit of the movie, where a couple thugs come into this store and start roughhousing, stealing some stuff, and they look like they're going to cause a scene with her. And Keong puts them in their place, and he actually makes one of them apologize to Elaine in Chinese, which is a fun little moment. But of course, being thugs, they're now going to make Keong's life a living hell. There's a bunch of scenes after this where they chase him. The next scene we see of them is really graphic. If you're used to Jackie Chan movies like having fight scenes but are not too graphic, this scene will surprise you. And in fact, Jackie was actually a little worried about this scene due to the amount of blood used because he thought parents were going to complain, which I can understand. I mean, if you take your kid to see a Jackie Chan movie and you're used to there being action, but it being like maybe you have some broken arms or anything, but no blood being shown, it will be a little graphic. But since it's set in New York, and these are New York thugs, and they are threatening to kill him, I think that this does nail home that, okay, this is serious. Especially since they're going after a cop. That's not said in the edit, but it's still there. And plus, you can't have glass thrown at somebody the way that it's thrown at him and not expect there to be blood. It's like watching professional wrestling, watching a cage or Hell in a Cell match and expecting there be no blood. You can do it, but why? Kyung's character does survive. He's a little worse for wear, but he comes back. He has a few other interactions with this gang. It does culminate in a big fight scene with the leader. The guy that comes across as a second in command, he really has it out for Kyung. Then we got some larger criminal syndicates that show up that are hinted at early on when they mention a diamond heist, and this is what culminates in the end part. I'm not really going to spoil a lot of that for those of you who haven't seen the movie, but it's the ending that this deserves, and it does end on a comedic note. But given how this film balances seriousness with some comedic stuff, especially in the fight scenes, like one of the big fight scenes where Jackie is threatening to hit this guy with a glass bottle, just that whole timing of the choreography is like, oh yeah, that's comedic, but there is a little note of seriousness in there because it's a glass bottle. It's like in TMNT 1990 when Leo is threatening to cut off the one foot soldier's head, and then he fakes him out and is like, gotcha, and then kicks him. Which is kind of funny because Golden Harvest was involved in the production of both films. Now, from here, they were a distributor in the production, whereas in that one, they were actually the money people. Kind of interesting because both martial arts films. When it comes to the street thugs versus the syndicate, you really see the difference in the level of criminal, both in their competency and also their professionalism. With the street thugs, it's really chaotic. You see, they're just there to have fun, they'll make money, but they just want to do what they want. Now, with the professional thugs, they'll do what they want, but they have standards, and they will kill anyone that gets in their way. Whereas with the street thugs, they'll kill you if you force them to, but if the situation calls for it, they're just going to let you live. Like with the whole glass baseball scene, they were going to kill Kyung, but just because of one little thing that one of the thugs did, it ruined the whole vibe, and they're like, yeah, man, I don't even want to anymore. The other guys had been like, well, that takes care of the fun. Alrighty. And then we just sort of killed them and walked away. And, of course, the scene where they use a wood chipper, I think that also shows a difference, because I don't see the street thugs in this movie using a wood chipper. Granted, we don't see anything graphic with it, but there's enough implication. The film's rated R in America, so it makes you wonder why they didn't just show it, but I think it's one of those situations where implication in theater of the mind works a lot better than anything they could have shown. Jackie Chan, like I said, plays Kyung. He does a pretty good job. Fight scenes very well. Every motion that he makes is fluid. When he jumps around, does pretty good. He uses stuff in the background, like pieces of pipe, uses his jacket. Now, I have not seen the films he did before this, but based on what I see here, and the fact that this is the film that launched him into the mainstream, I believe this is the film that started that meme about, you know, you put Jackie against somebody, it's like, let's put Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet versus Jackie Chan with a jacket saying, I don't want any trouble. And of course, the final fight scene he does against the one leader, he doesn't want any trouble, but at that point, he's been pushed to it. And then that look with him with the black tank top, that's a very iconic look for him. You know, and you could tell by how he plays himself in that one pretty good. Now, with the dubbing he does over himself in a couple moments, you can kind of tell it's obvious that the lip flaps don't match fully, but they're close enough to where it's not a bad thing, which I got a little bit to say about the dubbing as a whole, but I'll save that for a little bit. Anita Moy, if I'm pronouncing that last name correctly, plays Elaine. She does a pretty good job for the few moments she's in there. Very subtle, but later on when the syndicate does something to her new store, she really flips her lid. Goes a little over the top, but given what just happened, you understand why she's going that way. And you know, she was a cantopop singer-actress. The year before, she was with Jackie in Legend of the Drunken Master, which is why I feel in the scenes that they share together, they have a little bit of chemistry. I mean, their characters aren't love interests, but they're friends and work buddies, so it does work there. Sadly, she passed away in 2003, so rest in peace. Françoise Yip played Nancy. She did a pretty good job as well. She looks good in here. She's a Canadian actress, and she was also in Romeo Must Die, AVP Requiem as Miss Yutani, and The Predator. Still haven't seen that film, by the way. I just, it's one of those ones I'm like, yeah, I gotta get to watch it eventually, but I don't know when I will. It's probably gonna be one that I'll probably start off being like, ugh, from what I've heard. She does have a pretty good chemistry with Jackie. It does seem a little forced, their romance, but it's believable. I could see it as her regretting everything and at first dating him out of pity, but then they genuinely grow to care for one another. And I know that they edited out at least 20 minutes, so it makes me wonder if there's some other stuff that was on the cutting room floor in the original cut that made their relationship seem a little bit more believable. But in the cut as is, it looks like partially regret and also seeing that he is good with her brother, so... And also the brother does say some lines that kind of hint that he's trying to ship them. Come on, Jackie, you know you wanna. Mark Akerstream played Tony, who is the leader of the street gang. He passed away in 1998, sad to say, which just shows there's kind of a sad pattern with this movie. A lot of the people that I'm going to be mentioning passed away. He did acting in a couple other films, but he mainly did stunt work. He is pretty believable as Tony. He does a decent job of what he has to do. Definitely believe him in the fight scenes, but especially the one-on-one he has with Jackie. At first, you really don't like him because he's the leader of the street gang that's hassling Jackie. You know, they just want to throw him off, trying to kill him. But by the end of the film, you kind of forgive him a bit. Just a bit. It's not like Angelo, who's played by Garvin Cross, where you're like, even with all that, it's like, this guy. So you're wishing the Syndicate would kill him just because of how much of an ass he is. Which, Cross, he was in Blade Trinity. He did some stunt work and he played a small role. Like Akerstream, he mainly did stunt work, so there's not really much to say, but he is detestable as Angelo. You really want to see Jackie kick his butt. Which the one scene where he whips his bare backside with the antenna, you're like, oh no, I know where this is going. You're like, oh yeah, you deserve that, Angelo. You wish it was a bigger comeuppance for him, but let's just say that when he gets into the crosshairs of the Syndicate, what little happens to him, he deserves. Bill Tung played Uncle Bill. Sadly, he's another one that passed away. He passed away in 2006. This is not the first Jackie Chan film he was in. It wouldn't be the last. He was in Super Cop, he was in Police Story, and he was in First Strike. And oddly enough, he always played a character named Uncle Bill. I guess you could say that if you were going to compile a list of tropes for Jackie Chan films, that would be one. Uncle Bill. That seems to be a fun one. Like Uncle Bill. He's only in the first part of the film and he disappears once his character goes on the honeymoon, but it's nice to see him there, especially since he's the reason why Keung is in the Bronx. Which, funny enough, this film was not filmed in the Bronx. It was filmed in Vancouver. What is it with films that are set in New York being filmed in Vancouver? It's not the first one. They did it in Jason Takes Manhattan and they did it here. I'm guessing it's because it's cheaper to film there. Now, like a lot of those films, the production crew was trying to hide the fact that they were in Vancouver. They had to put a fake graffiti and clean it down at the end of production days, and they were trying to hide mountains in the background. But Jackie, as he puts in one of his books, told them eventually, just focus on the action over the scenery. Which that does work. The action looks immaculate, and there's a lot of times where you can't even tell unless you're looking carefully. It was the scene near the end involving the hovercraft that I really could tell they were there, because I'm like, I don't think you could see that type of mountains in the Hudson River. But it's one of those things that you suspend your disbelief for. It's like that one shot in Halloween, the originals. Like, there are no mountains like that in Illinois. Jackie completed the parking structure jump on his first attempt. And during the credits, you can see the crew reaction to it. They're applauding him, and he's like, And during another stunt involving the hovercraft, Jackie broke his right ankle while attempting a jump. He had a special sock constructed to go over his cast, which, like the clapping, we do see a little bit of this during the credit scene. And from a distance, it's like, yeah, it will blend in. But even with this broken ankle, he still attended the Vancouver premiere of Legend of the Drunken Master. And you know how Jackie is, he'll persevere. Reminds me of a line that he said in the blooper reel for Rush Hour 2. Jackie always okay. On set, the actors spoke in their native languages. Jackie did Cantonese, Francoise did English, for example. This is something I had a suspicion on while watching it, because it's like, that's definitely Jackie dubbing it, so him, I could definitely tell he probably spoke Cantonese in it. But a lot of the thugs, I'm like, this sounds more like they're speaking English. And just from a simplicity standpoint, you could see why, because then they'll just dub over those actors in the Cantonese version. But once New Line got it to distribute their cut of it, they dubbed over all the English ones, at least when it came to them having to make their changes to it. Like the character of Danny, it's an obvious dub voice for him, because one, I know it's a light voice, but that does not sound like a boy of his age. And also some stuff about the audio, I'm like, yeah, that's an obvious dub. It's like the voice they gave Arnold in the original version of Hercules in New York. You can tell it's a dub, because you're like, there's just something about this voice, it doesn't fit this person. And that's, I find more an issue when it comes to dubbing live action than when it comes to dubbing animation. Because with animation, I feel you can suspend your disbelief a bit more. Whereas with real life, you look at it and go, oh, there's something off here. That's just the difference between the two mediums. The warehouse fight scene took 20 days to shoot, which is amazing. I mean, on screen it shows because of how tightly filmed and edited that scene is, how flawless and smooth a lot of the fight stuff looks. Even the parts that are a little bit more chaotic about it, but it flows so smoothly. And to help it flow that way, Jackie taught the local stunt players the Hong Kong style, and that shows on film. The dub cut out all references to Jackie being a cop, but that's not all it did. It cut the film down by 20 minutes from various cuts. On Wikipedia, it mentions a couple of the important ones, which, looking at them, I'm like, okay, that explains it, because there was a couple moments where the film kind of flowed a bit weird, and those cuts make sense. If you've seen the Americanized version, you probably understand what I'm talking about. But IMDb has all the trimmings listed, and I just skimmed through it. I'm like, okay, that explains a lot. Some of them are so minor that they don't really affect anything, and you can see why they were cut. Like a scene later with the cops talking about the cigar, there was a follow-up line cut. But funny enough, there's also two scenes that appear only in this version of the film. The gang escape outside the nightclub, following the whole Nancy dancing in front of the tiger cage scene, and White Tiger receiving a call while playing golf. Now that one, when I read that, I'm like, really? That's only in this version? White Tiger, for those of you who haven't guessed it, is the leader of the syndicate. I'm like, that strikes me as a pivotal one, but I can kind of see why. Maybe they wanted to make it a little less obvious in the original cut that they were onto them until it looked like they were about to kill Keong. So I can see why they cut that out. It's one of those ones like, both work, but one plays for suspense, the other one is surprise. I think the suspense one probably works a bit better. Early in the film, Keong gives the character of Danny a Sega Game Gear, and Danny is seen playing it a couple times. The funny thing is, and I'm surprised I didn't notice this when he handed it to him, there's no cartridge in the Game Gear when Danny gives it to him. So unless Danny somehow acquired a game, which, unless he was given one off screen, I don't know how he could afford one since they're always complaining about money and all that. How is he playing it? It's just one of those weird little things that I guess they forgot there was supposed to be one in there and they just said screw it. That they'd rather just have him playing one and not bother about the minor continuity there. In conclusion, Rumble in the Bronx is a fun and enjoyable film. The action is spot on. The comedy that's interplayed throughout does not bring any of the action to a halt, doesn't kill any of the scenes. The characters are likable. Keong, you want to see him survive a lot of the more dangerous encounters with the gang members. When he finally does pick up a gun, you're like, okay, he's had enough of this. Well, to use the meme line, he didn't want any trouble. The romance, like I said, it could be a bit more believable. But that could be through from the cuts. The villains you detest to various levels, but when they finally get her comeuppance, you're like, Especially White Tiger at the end. I'm not going to spoil that one, but it's a good note to end the film on. Score is pretty good for the film. And it definitely is a Jackie Chan film that anybody who's a fan of his later films should watch. Because if it wasn't for the success of this film, we probably would not have Rush Hour. We wouldn't have Shanghai Noon. We wouldn't have The Foreigner. We'd probably still have some of his later Hong Kong ones, but without this one and how much money it made here in America, we would not have a lot of those other ones. Thank you, John, for this request. And that concludes this review. Thank you, John, for the request. Look forward to chatting with you again one of these days. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, the Patreon and PayPal links are down below. With the Patreon, you get access to videos early, and you get to request videos such as this one. Till next time, guys.